Thank you for joining us. Democratic Senator Al Franken says he will be resigning in the coming weeks amid allegations of sexual misconduct. Franken, who represents Minnesota, made the announcement today from the floor of the Senate. He says the allegations and resulting backlash against him have made it impossible for him to effectively serve his constituents. 8 women have come forward to accuse the senator of harassment. He says some of the stories are not true and others he remembers differently. But more than 30 senators in his own party called for him to step down in the past week.
Serving in the United States Senate has been the great honor of my life. I know in my heart that nothing I have done as a senator, nothing, has brought this honor on this institution. And I am confident that the Ethics Committee would agree. Nevertheless, today I am announcing that in the coming weeks, I will be resigning as a member of the United States Senate. I, of all people, am aware that there is some irony in the fact that I am leaving while a man who has bragged on tape about his history of sexual assault sits in the Oval Office, and a man who has repeatedly preyed on young girls campaigns for the Senate with the full support of his party. But this decision is not about me. It's about the people of Minnesota. And it's become clear that I can't both pursue the Ethics Committee process and at the same time remain an effective senator for them.
James Pindell is a political reporter for the Boston Globe. James, do you think the senator really had a choice in this? That he had to leave?
Well, I think it's pretty clear that through the last few weeks, Al Franken did not want to leave at all. But there has continued to be a drip, drip, drip of allegations, 2 more allegations just yesterday. And when you lose the confidence of the entire caucus, it doesn't really matter what he wanted, as I think he hinted at. It mattered of whether or not he'd even be effective. And it's pretty clear at this point that he would not be very effective, at least within the side of the Democratic Party. And that would mean he would not be very effective for the state of Minnesota. And
a man who won elections by a few hundred votes or so. What's the process now for him, for replacing him? And do you think a Republican could win a special election in Minnesota?
Well, Minnesota is going to be quite the political epicenter of 2018. To walk you through the logistics here, he's going to step down by the end of the year. He's not stepping down immediately. And then there's a Democratic governor there, Mark Dayton. He's going to be able to appoint a successor, probably also will be picking a Democrat, most likely will be picking his lieutenant governor, who is a woman, by the way. Then here's the amazing thing about Minnesota in 2018. They're going to have an open race for governor, which will be very fascinating to watch. They have 2 U.S. Senate contests on the ballot and as many as 5 competitive House races, probably more because a lot of these folks who are incumbent members of Congress, they want to run for U.S. Senate or run for governor themselves. So we're going to have a lot of things going on in Minnesota next year. Could a Republican win? Well, look, Minnesota has been a slight swing state. It's still largely a Democratic state, though we all remember Republican Governor Tim Pawlenty. We also remember Republican Senator Norm Coleman recently, who, of course, Al Franken defeated a few years ago in 2008. But I think what's key here is that this is going to be a Trump midterm, and Trump is very unpopular in Minnesota, so you obviously have to give the edge to Democrats of retaining the seat.
Interesting to hear you say an open seat. Minnesota might be a state to watch. I'm curious, though, we see these special elections popping up. You look over at Alabama and Senate candidate Roy Moore. Do you think this will have any impact on his situation there in that race?
Well, it may not have much impact on this particular situation. I think those who say Al Franken is helping Roy Moore come back, I think it's a little bit overblown if you listen to the people of Alabama. No one's quoting Al Franken, but it will help an argument next year. You know, if Democrats can say that they cleaned house while Republicans are standing by those either in the Oval Office, as Al Franken referenced, or Roy Moore, it's a very clean, very easy thing for voters to understand who may be wavering from one party to the other. Not sure it helps Roy Moore on Tuesday, but it could easily help Democrats next year.
I want to switch gears for a second and talk about tax overhaul. You know, there's a new poll from CBS News, and it found that 76% of Americans believe that the plan actually helps large corporations. 69% said it benefits the wealthy. Only about a quarter actually think that this will help their family, despite the GOP calling this a middle-class tax cut. Do you think that this in any way spells trouble for Republicans?
Well, look, this has been a story about the U.S. Senate all along and whether or not enough Republicans were going to go along. Clearly, the first phase of this tax reform bill barely passed the Senate. It's heading out of conference after we get through the House and the Senate versions, try to sort of coalescing here. Not with a lot of positive energy behind it, as this CBS News poll shows. And a lot of people are accepting the premise of what the bill would do. The question is whether or not they think that's a good thing or a bad thing. Look, clearly, if you are Republicans, you want more public support. I think the CBS poll showed that just if you combine it, 36% of people would be happy or just sort of satisfied with this bill passing. That's not exactly a really good thing that you're trying to pass in the last minute.
But the sense is, though, James, that this will go through and they'll be able to reconcile?
Well, that's the sense. But look, we're one senator away, or two senators away from this getting extremely interesting. And there are senators who are saying, well, I voted to pass this thing the first time, but if you change this or change that, I won't be voting for it. So it's still something to very much watch. Okay.
I want to read you a quote, James. This comes from House Speaker Paul Ryan. It was during a radio interview, and he said, we're going to have to get back next year at entitlement reform, which is how you tackle the debt and the deficit. He's talking about cuts to Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security. His plan would actually add $1 trillion to the debt and the deficit. This is according to a nonpartisan analysis. Can he still make this argument?
Well, look, I mean, this is why this kind of is a perfect follow-up to the last question. Because if you want to look at Maine Senator Susan Collins, she's someone who voted for the tax plan, but she says, look, I'm concerned about the amount of money we're going to be adding to the debt. And if the way you pay down that debt is to go after entitlements, if that's what you're going to do, you're not going to get my vote on tax reform. So you see how Republicans are trying to thread a needle that's really difficult. It is amazing to watch, though, that we had Republicans during the 1990s, during the 2000s, a big strand of them would basically say how Democrats are responsible for a large national debt and a large national deficit, to be so willing to pass a tax package that adds $1 trillion to it. However, you have to give credit to Paul Ryan, who obviously accepts the premise that it would add the money to the debt, and he wants to try to do something about it. How popular that will be, particularly in an election year, well, that remains to be seen.
Yeah, you make a good point there. Before I let you go, I've got to ask you, the government runs out of funding tomorrow. Where is Congress on this?
Well, it looks like we're not going to shut down the government this week, but later in the month is a different question. It looks like there's definitely the votes there to pass this question on for another 2 weeks until December 22nd. And when it comes to that, I don't know what's going to happen. There's a meeting tonight, of course, in the White House with Chuck Schumer, Nancy Pelosi, obviously meeting Donald Trump. And at issue here is whether or not, in particular, there's going to be a deal to help those folks who are under the Dreamer Act, those undocumented immigrants who were fine for a while but now no longer are. The Democratic base is going to go bananas. And some Republicans are pretty upset if there's not something to fix that problem by the end of the year, and that is directly tied to this issue here. And then there's some conservatives in the House who are concerned about what exactly are we going to talk about going forward around spending. They want more defense spending but less on other domestic kinds of spending. So I think right now we're not going to shut down, but at the end of the month, there's something to watch.
All right, James Pindell, thank you so much for joining us, James.